Team U.S. and Team Europe. That's the tableau described at the White House today. Ukraine locked arms fervently. Meanwhile, Russia keeps the war going. In public, the Trump administration calls it a scam and criminal. In court, it says there's no evidence of that. We look at the fight over Biden-era environmental grants. Chatbots and psychosis, how artificial intelligence engineered chatbots may worsen, even amplify delusions. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Let me welcome you to the Takeout. Terminology, tenacity, trilateral. I'm going to be obsessed with those three T words because the fate of Ukraine may well depend on all of them. In an extraordinary convening at the White House today, President Trump met with Ukrainian President Zelenskyy and the most powerful European leaders to see if the savage war launched by Russia can end with what remains of Ukraine intact and protected. That's where terminology matters. The diplomatic air is peppered right now with references to security guarantees and Article 5-like protections. How those are defined and fortified will decide if the end of war means safety for Ukraine or it living in the permanent stalking shadow of Russia. America and Europe simply cannot guarantee Ukraine's security or back up something like Article 5-like protections without tenacity. Tenacity means troops, armed troops, prepared and trained to deter and possibly repel a future Russia attack. Speaking of terminology, Article 5, what is it? Well, it is the core of the NATO alliance. An attack on one member nation triggers a military response from all. Never before, we should remind ourselves, has Europe contemplated diluting the plain language of Article 5 with the word like, meaning similar to but not exactly. The last word is trilateral. That's a meeting with President Trump, President Zelenskyy, and President Putin of Russia at some future time. Before Trump met with Putin in Alaska Friday, he pressed for a ceasefire. He no longer does. Hours before today's White House meeting, Russia launched more aerial attacks on Ukrainian civilians, inflicting more injuries and death. Where this heads, no one quite knows. Trump vacillated publicly between confidence and resignation today. Confidence, a peace deal could be struck and held. Resignation, the war could very well drag on. What came from Russia, in addition to drones and missiles, was denunciation of any European troops inside Ukraine to guarantee its protection. Moscow called that idea provocative. Pretty rich considering who started all of this. We begin tonight with Olivia Rinaldi, who joins us from the White House. Olivia, great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Things are still going on at the White House. The president, President Zelenskyy, and the European leaders still, as I gather it, talking.
Yeah, Major, we have yet to see any of those major European leaders leave the White House here today, including Ukrainian President Zelenskyy, They're still here, and they're still talking about those things you mentioned, that potential trilateral meeting between President Trump, President Zelenskyy, and President Putin. They're also talking about those security agreements. That was the key underlying point of today. That's what we heard from Secretary Rubio yesterday on Face the Nation, where he said that's what we're going to be discussing. What that actually look like? What does Article 5-like protections mean? Even President Trump today was asked whether that means troops on the ground in Ukraine. This coming from a president who said he would start no more foreign wars. Major, he didn't rule that out, that there could potentially be a military presence on the ground in Ukraine. I'm also thinking back to that mineral agreement that the U.S. and Ukraine signed earlier this year after diplomatic relations fell apart and then came back together, which strengthens economic ties between the U.S. and Ukraine, giving the U.S. a vested interest in the future and security of Ukraine. That was the first step. But now what does this look like to prevent any further Russian aggression if they are able to get to the table and have not a ceasefire, as you mentioned, but a full peace deal? what would that look like? Would there be a European security force on the ground? And just one last point on that ceasefire. We heard from German Chancellor Merz, who said he believes there needs to be a ceasefire on the ground in order for there to be any discussion about a peace proposal. He said that while sitting at the table with President Trump, who has now, since Friday, after meeting with President Putin, changed his stance, where he said he believes there needed to be a ceasefire. Now he doesn't believe that there needs to be a ceasefire in order to get a peace deal. The German chancellor there saying there needs to be one in order to stop the bloodshed and killing and actually get some full-throated agreement on the ground between President Putin and President Zelenskyy.
Olivia Rinaldi, please stand by, as I know you will, at the White House. If there's any other developments, we will go back to you as the day progresses. Thank you so very much. Former National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, one of several in the first Trump administration, joins me now. He's also a CBS News foreign policy and national security contributor. H.R., always great to see you. I want to play you some sound from the president today because it left me a little bit perplexed. It's about what he believes President Putin of Russia has agreed to regarding security guarantees for Ukraine. Let's play that sound.
President Putin agreed that Russia would accept security guarantees for Ukraine, and this is one of the key points that we need to consider, and we're going to be considering that at the table also, like who will do what, essentially.
HR, why I'm perplexed by that is because officials in Moscow today denounced any conversation at all about British forces in Ukraine or European forces in Ukraine, calling it flat out provocative and a sure way to continue the war. I can't put those two things together.
Well, I think what you have is a case of President Trump trying to get Russia to agree to this, because he knows that this is what Vladimir Zelenskyy needs, right? President Zelenskyy needs security guarantees because the objective for the Ukrainian leadership, I think for Europe, for us, ought to be a free, sovereign Ukraine that is capable of defending itself in perpetuity to prevent any further Russian aggression and is on a path to reconstruction, right? And regaining, the lives of so many people who have been, so many families have been affected in such a profound way. So, it's important also to remember, Major, we had troops in Ukraine. We had advisors in Ukraine. We had ships in the Black Sea. And the Biden administration pulled them back in an effort to allay Putin's security concerns and a belief that maybe that was a way to prevent the war. But of course, what that revealed is that what provokes Putin is the perception of weakness. It turned out to be kind of a green light for the war. So this is not unprecedented for us to have advisors, for example, in Ukraine, and to have a much more considerable military presence in the Black Sea region.
Do you believe President Trump would be willing to send U.S. forces into Ukraine as part of this security guarantor force, either on the line of demarcation or very near to it, to buttress European forces?
I think it's possible. I think President Trump, if anything, demonstrates a degree of flexibility in these issues. I think, what Putin right now should realize is he came out of the Alaska meeting looking pretty good, right, in terms of what he wanted to achieve, because he thought what he had gotten President Trump to agree to is a peace agreement that was unacceptable to Ukraine and unacceptable to Europeans. Because what Putin wants to do, not only to subsume Ukraine, but to fold that into a broader effort to recreate the Russian Empire, and to do that by weakening the transatlantic relationship, splintering NATO. And what you see today, and give credit to President Trump and the European leaders, is you see a degree of unity here. And as you said at the top of the segment, this message of U.S. and Europe being together, that's got to be a little bit disquieting to Vladimir Putin, who, by the way, Major, is in a position of profound weakness. So when Chancellor Merz today said, hey, how about putting some pressure on Russia? I think he's got a really good point, because Putin is trying to appear strong. He doesn't want a ceasefire because he's trying to make even modest territorial gains on the front in Ukraine to appear as if he's strong. But his forces are taking, in my view, unsustainable losses, and he has very severe economic and financial difficulties.
And very quickly, HR, to that point raised by Chancellor Merz of Germany, there should be no trilateral meeting without a ceasefire that's enforceable. Agree?
Yeah, I think that should be the goal. Now, what President Trump is trying to do is demonstrate some flexibility to see how this plays out. But I think a path to a ceasefire is more pressure on Putin because, hey, my theory here, and this is what's really important, Major, is I think you have to make an assumption about what is driving and constraining Vladimir Putin. It's not security, his security concerns. It's not what he calls as these root causes, to denazify a country that is led by a Jew, who was no threat to him at all. It's really important for us to recognize that what motivates Putin is this desire to reestablish the empire. And you know what? When he will stop is when he believes that he can no longer, continue this war of aggression at an acceptable cost and risk to him. And so, in other words, Putin won't stop until he is stopped. You have to got to remember, he poisoned a presidential candidate in 2004, waged a sustained campaign of subversion all the way up to the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014. So it's important also to remember this is an 11-year war at this stage. And so he's not going to stop, I believe, until he is stopped. But the good news is he's in a position of weakness. The good news is President Trump and European leaders are showing unity when Putin's best hope was for division.
H.R. McMaster, always a pleasure, sir. Thanks so much for your time.
Great to be with you, Major.
President Trump says Washington, D.C. is now, in his terminology, safe. This just a week into his crime crackdown involving federal forces, among them National Guard troops. And, incidentally, National Guard troops from 4 Republican states are now heading to Washington, D.C. If they arrive, this would nearly double the number of soldiers already here. And a White House official says those National Guard forces may, in the future, be armed. Scott McFarland joins me now. Scott, catch us up on what the weekend revealed, where these forces are, and significantly where they are not.
The National Guard troops that are visible to people who go through Washington, D.C. are in those visible locations along the National Mall, near the transit hub, big train station in Washington, D.C., in spots where you'd see a lot of tourists, a lot of visitors, and some amount of crime. They're not in actual neighborhoods, the granular neighborhoods we all can relate to, places where there's a school, where there's single-family homes, condominium towers,
and
pharmacies.
And significantly, statistically higher episodes of crime.
Where the actual residents are.
And where the criminal action has been. They're not there.
The community members would say, yes, they've had histories of spikes in crime in Northeast Washington, D.C., and Southeast Washington, D.C. They're just not seeing federal agents or National Guard troops there now. The role of the Guard is limited. They're not carrying firearms now. As you mentioned, they may soon be doing so. They're not making arrests now. But the National Guard's reinforcing their numbers quite a bit without a clear mission. They're going to double the number of troops in Washington, D.C., with those other 4 states adding their troops to the mix.
And there is an immigration component to this. We saw that play out over the weekend.
A percentage of these arrests, a good percentage of these arrests, are people who are accused of immigration violations. And, of course, one of the main criticisms the president and his administration have had of Washington, D.C., is they argue Washington, D.C. has been a sanctuary community where they don't fully abide by federal immigration rules. This is, in part, changing the complexion of how Washington, D.C. handles federal immigration rules by having federal agents doing the law enforcement.
The president also said today people are going to restaurants in Washington, D.C. for the first time in 4 years. That's not true. People go to Washington, D.C. restaurants with regularity all the time.
And the business owners in Washington with whom we spoke tonight for the CBS Evening News are reporting that's not so much true now as it was a week ago, that they've seen some downturns in their customer load because of either concerns from outsiders of coming to Washington or people who live here not wanting to go out as much with there being federal law enforcement manning the corners.
Because it looks a little intimidating depending on what street you're driving down and at what speed.
So I tell you what, though, fascinating issue. There's not one opinion on one side and one on the other. A whole portfolio of different views on this inside Washington, D.C. It'll be fascinating how that changes over time.
Scott McFarland, it's always a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much. Former Attorney General Bill Barr answering questions on Capitol Hill today, what he had to say to lawmakers who are looking into the Jeffrey Epstein case. What happens when chatbots help shape your reality? How artificial intelligence is fueling what may be an emerging mental health crisis. Plus, they were given money under President Biden to fight climate change. Now the Trump administration wants that money back. Next, I'll speak with the head of one environmental group about efforts to claw back the cash. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back. The Trump administration has claimed the Biden administration improperly distributed climate change-related funds to organizations it calls undeserving. Earlier today, I spoke to the head of one of those organizations. It received a $2 billion grant from the EPA during the Biden era. The Trump administration is now trying to get that money back. Here is some of that conversation. Tim, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for joining me here at the Takeout. I'm going to give you a big picture question because there's a lot of things that have been name-checked recently by the Trump administration. One, that the organization that you are funded through or received a grant from is a part of a scam, that Stacey Abrams is involved, and that there is rampant criminality that requires the intervention of the Justice Department to save taxpayer funds. Give me your assessment of all those things that are out there.
So it's great to be here. Thanks for the question. So I'm the CEO of Power Forward Communities. PFC is a coalition of some of the nation's leading nonprofits that are really focused on affordable housing, which is a great need in this country, and lowering energy costs, utility bills for regular Americans. That's what the organization's about. It's made up of truly leading, nationwide, highly respected nonprofit organizations. The group came together to apply for a grant from the Environmental Protection Agency to be able to do that work.
With funding that was created in the Inflation Reduction Act under the previous administration.
Correct. So we went through that process. It was a highly competitive process, and we had put together, I think, what was a very impressive application to the EPA, focused in on the two things I mentioned, affordable housing and lowering energy costs. The new administration decided that it didn't like that policy and sought to freeze the funding that had been awarded to us and actually deposit it into our bank account. But the administration, despite public statements, has admitted repeatedly in court that it has found no fraud, no waste, no abuse, no wrongdoing on our part at all. And while it has mentioned Stacey Abrams from time to time, the fact is that Ms. Abrams was a part-time temporary consultant to one of the coalition members. She was never an employee of PFC. She never received any money from the grant. She was never intended to receive any money and never will receive any money from the grant. So that's the background on that.
So if anyone listening to this conversation were to start doing a Google search, they might see a reference to gold bars. Walk me through the gold bars part of this.
So I don't personally know anything about gold bars. It was apparently a comment made by a junior staffer at the EPA while at a bar or a party or something. And it's been used to try to discredit this entire program. But the fact of the matter is that this was a highly structured, competitive process that the United States government went through to pursue a policy objective, which was to bring money to bear on creating opportunities to adopt much more efficient energy. And today, these are huge nonpartisan issues. There is not enough affordable housing in the United States. People's utility bills are way too high. I mean, the cost of electricity is increasing at twice the rate of inflation and has been for the last few years. People are having to make hard choices between putting food on the table for their families and keeping the lights on in their houses. We're not engaged in a partisan or political process. We're just trying to help create and preserve affordable housing and lower people's utility bills. And we're prepared to do that and have sought to do that in both red jurisdictions and blue jurisdictions, big cities, little towns, rural communities, tribal communities. This is just an effort to try to make everyday people's lives better.
The context for that gold bars reference was during the latter stages of the Biden administration, there was, according to this one mid-level or low-level EPA staffer, a rush to get the money out the door. And the context was it's like we're on the Titanic putting gold bars over the edge. Was there a rush to get the money out the door before the Biden administration ended?
I'm not aware of any rush. I mean, this was a months-long process to actually put together the applications and evaluate them.
A fair amount of the grant awards came before Election Day.
Oh, the grants were awarded before Election Day. We were advised in April of 2024, before the election, that we had won an award. We didn't. We received the money. We accepted the grant in August of 2024. So again, before the election. So I'm not really sure what the focus is on gold bars, but They've taken on a kind of mythic quality, however. And you mentioned this before, but I want to give you a chance to expound. You said in court filings, the administration has conceded no fraud, no criminality, and the like. How has that happened? So after we were awarded this grant, the administration froze the funds. It instructed Citibank, where the funds are sitting, not to disperse any of the money to us, and therefore we couldn't disperse the money to projects that we'd already lined up to do. And as this went on for a while, it became apparent that we were going to need to go to court in order to get access to our funds. So we went to federal court here in Washington, D.C., and the federal judge who heard the case asked a lot of questions of the government, including, is there any evidence of fraud? Is there any evidence of waste? Is there any evidence of abuse? And the answer to that was no. We've engaged in a policy change, and therefore we're entitled to freeze these accounts. The judge disagreed with that and issued an injunction prohibiting the government from interfering with our access to the funds. And then the government has appealed that to the Court of Appeals, where the case is now pending.
Got it. You can watch my full interview with Tim Mayopoulos, who has a fascinating career working with the federal government in real estate, banking, and the like, on the Takeout's YouTube page and all podcast platforms. Behind closed doors on Capitol Hill, President Trump's former Attorney General Bill Barr faces questions from lawmakers looking into the Epstein matter. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Thanks for hanging out with us. Here is a look at what else we and now you are watching this evening. U.S. forces will begin withdrawing from Iraq next month. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad announced a U.S.-led coalition against ISIS will shift to a bilateral security partnership with the Iraqi government. American Special Forces, you might remember, returned to Iraq in 2014 to combat ISIS. The U.S. mission in Iraq is scheduled to end in September of next year. The fifth and final defendant charged in the overdose death of Friends TV star Matthew Perry has agreed to plead guilty. The woman known as the Ketamine Queen was charged with selling Perry the drug that killed him. Jasveen Sangha could get up to 45 years in prison. Perry was found dead in his Los Angeles home after overdosing on ketamine. Former Attorney General Bill Barr was on Capitol Hill today as part of the investigation led by the House Oversight Committee into Jeffrey Epstein's death. Barr, who was Attorney General at the time Epstein died in jail by apparent suicide, testified before that committee. Barr has previously said he was, quote, appalled at Epstein's death and pointed to failures at the New York facility where he was being held. So, what did he say today? What did the committee learn? Nicole Killian joins me now for answers to that. Nicole, great to see you. So, what did he say? If it's knowable, or more knowable, probably, is the various members' reaction to whatever he said.
Yeah, absolutely. And as anything with Congress, as it pertains to Congress, I should say.
Opinions differ.
Exactly, depending on party. So obviously the chairman, James Comer, said that they did learn quite a bit today from the Attorney General. Democrats, on the other hand, felt, hey, we didn't learn more than things that we've already read in the press, right? That being said, we did hear a little bit from Bill Barr himself. He didn't really take questions, but did say a couple of words acknowledging that this was a good conversation, and also standing by this ruling that he and others made at the time of Jeffrey Epstein's death, that he does stand by the fact that he still believes that it was a suicide. Take a listen to what lawmakers thought of his deposition today.
I don't think we're learning much from the questioning from the House Republicans. It doesn't seem like this is something where they are truly caring about the victims and about trying to get to the bottom of what's happening, whereas on the Democratic side, we are asking the tough questions and trying to get some answers.
The Democrats' goal is to try to dig up some type of dirt on President Trump. And what Attorney General Barr testified in there was that he never had conversations with President Trump pertaining to a client list. He didn't know anything about a client list.
So again, as you heard the chairman there say, he feels the Democrats are politicizing this issue. Nonetheless, though, he did acknowledge that the attorney general, former attorney general, answered all of the committee's questions. And keep in mind that Bill Barr is really the first of several witnesses that this panel is expected to call over the next couple of weeks, including a host of former attorney generals. We're going to hear from Alberto Gonzales. They have called Eric Holder, Merrick Garland, among others, also the former FBI directors, James Comey, Robert Mueller, in addition to the Clintons. So all of these depositions, they're expecting to take place, obviously, behind closed doors over the next several weeks.
And just before you came in, a few moments before you came in, Nicole, I saw an email from the Oversight Committee saying the Department of Justice is in the process of responding to a subpoena for underlying documents in its possession.
Yeah, that's right. Because keep in mind, the panel had also issued a subpoena not only to some of those individuals that I just named, but also to the Department of Justice as well, to again push on the department to publicly release the rest of the Epstein files. We know that the administration has kind of started that process, but obviously there has been a huge clamoring on Capitol Hill for these full files to be declassified. So tomorrow is actually the deadline for the Department of Justice to respond. The committee acknowledged they didn't expect the department to meet that deadline, which is why we're seeing that statement late today acknowledging, yes, the agency is cooperating, but we may not get everything we need by that deadline.
Nicole Killian, thank you very, very much. President Trump's push toward getting rid, he says he wants to, mail-in ballots, even though they were part of his reelection. Why he says he's skeptical about them. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back. In the category, quite probably, of more bark than bite, President Trump today said he will sign an executive order aimed at eliminating voting through mail-in ballots ahead of the 2026 midterms.
Mail-in ballots are corrupt. Mail-in ballots, you can never have a real democracy with mail-in ballots. And we, as a Republican Party, are going to do everything possible that we get rid of mail-in ballots.
Worth noting that this country, in one form or another, has used mail balloting since the Civil War. And President Trump used it himself in 2024 and encouraged other Republicans to use it as well. I discussed this idea, among many others, with the head of the National Constitution Center, Jeffrey Rosen, earlier here. And here is some of that conversation. Jeff, it's so great to see you. Thanks so much for joining me at the Conversation Corner. I want to start with things that are very recent, like today, this morning. President Trump on Truth Social said something about his powers as regards elections, and that flows directly through our Constitution. He wrote, "Remember, the states are merely an agent for the federal government in counting and tabulating the votes. They must do what the federal government, as represented by the President of the United States, tells them." That's not my reading of the Constitution when the clause, time, manner, and place cycles through my memory.
You're absolutely right. And it's so striking that the decision to leave primary control over election to the states was the fundamental choice of the original framers. Congress has limited control over election. It can set the time, place, and manner, but the details of who gets to vote and when, if Congress doesn't intervene, and how to count are all left up to the states, which is why we have 50 different systems. During Reconstruction, Congress could have nationalized elections, but they didn't, and that's led to so many of the election disputes ever since. It really is remarkable how many basic democratic choices remain at the state level in America, and we do not have a tradition of national control.
Especially not flowing through any president. Because if there was anything that was debated hotly, and many things were at that time, after the Constitution was ratified and in the early stages of the presidency, it was, is this office dictatorial or not? Does it exert extraordinary political power over the will of the people?
I have a new book coming out about the battle between Hamilton and Jefferson throughout American history. It begins with the following scene. Dinner at Jefferson's house. Washington's away. The cabinet is gathered. At some point, Hamilton says to Jefferson, "Who are those three guys on the wall?" Jefferson says, "Those are my three portraits of the greatest men in history, John Locke, Francis Bacon, and Isaac Newton." Hamilton pauses, and then he blurts out, "The greatest man that ever lived was Julius Caesar." So Jefferson writes in his diary, this proves that Hamilton is for a monarchy bottomed on corruption, and he wants to resurrect Caesar in America. Now, it's an amazing story because Hamilton is almost certainly joking. He fears Julius Caesar running in at the head of Shays' rebellion and being a demagogue who will foment anarchy from below. Jefferson fears a Caesar from above. And both of them unite to oppose Aaron Burr, who they fear is a would-be Caesar who wants to lead an insurrection and install himself as a dictator. The point is that the fear of Caesarism is the central concern. It's the reason that the Constitution is designed to avoid concentrating all power in one man. And although Hamilton and Jefferson disagree about how strong to make the executive, they are both determined to prevent a resurrection of King George.
And that is so much a part of our conversation right now because this administration not only has the unitary executive, but it roots it in, among other things, Federalist 70, in which Alexander Hamilton says, and I'll read it right here, energy in the executive is a leading character in the definition of good government. This administration says Hamilton and others wanted an aggressive executive, energetic. And that's how they justify so many of the things they've done the second time around.
It's absolutely right that Hamilton wants an energetic executive, and he has been invoked throughout American history to support an energetic executive. But he does not want a king or a sovereign. Hamilton is crucial that the impeachment power will check corrupt executives, and he does not think that the president initially should have unchecked power to fire all executive officials. He has an unusual solution to his fears of Caesar. He wants a president elected for life, so the president won't be tempted to be corrupted. Jefferson wants the opposite, a president who could only have one term so that he won't be tempted to install himself in office. And there's an amazing letter that Jefferson writes to Madison when he first gets a copy of the Constitution. He says, "I'm afraid because the president can run again, a future president might lose an election by a few votes, refuse to leave office, and install himself as a dictator." So in other words, both of them are afraid of this unchecked executive. And although there's a long and honorable debate throughout American history about how strong the president should be, neither of them wants unchecked power.
And this country has experienced loud, contentious arguments about a king-like president. Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, FDR, Nixon in certain respects, and certainly now with President Trump.
Absolutely. And this fear of Caesarism is prevalent. And in fact, FDR is attacked so often as Caesar that he dresses up like Julius Caesar for his birthday, and Eleanor dresses up like a Roman matron, and he kind of makes fun of the whole thing. So there's a very honorable tradition in America of fearing concentrated presidential power. But the point is, separation of powers is the fundamental constitutional principle. The president's not a king. We, the people, have the sovereign power. No one branch of government can speak for our name, and it's urgently important to prevent an aspiring dictator who would consolidate all power in his own hands.
I'm delighted to tell you I had a much longer conversation with Jeffrey Rosen, and you can watch all of it on our Takeout YouTube page, and you can listen to it on our podcast platforms. It's fantastic. He's really, really in a class all by himself. A new space race, the U.S. and China focusing on returning humans to the moon and building a habitable base there. Acting NASA Administrator Sean Duffy on when we could see American boots back on the lunar surface. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back. NASA wants to send humans back to the moon for the first time since 1972. In this second space race, there's a new competitor, China. Our Mark Strassman spoke with Transportation Secretary and Acting NASA Administrator about this and so much more.
One of the goals, clearly, is to get to the moon ahead of the Chinese. The U.S. has been to the moon already. Does it matter this time if the Chinese get there first?
It does. So we won the first space race. We're going to win today's space race and tomorrow's space race because in the south pole of the moon, we have ice. Ice means water. Water means life. So we want to get there first. And again, we have great partners around the world that are working with us. But I think that matters. And again, there was a time when if you controlled the seas, you controlled the earth. I think tomorrow, he who controls space is going to control Earth. And again, America's never in the business of control. We're a peaceful country. We're a country that supports democracy. We have the same vision in space, but not everybody has the same perspective that we do on Earth or in space. And I think that's why it's important that we lead the way, not just in low Earth orbit, but also as we go to the moon and to Mars.
Is NASA still looking at mid-2027 for an Artemis 3 moon landing?
Yeah, we are. So again, we're looking for the first part of next year for Artemis 2. We'll learn a lot on that mission, but our hope is still 2027.
You think that's realistic?
I do.
Given where we are, the delays we've had with SpaceX, the complexity of the vision.
So I have no. Listen, I think it's important to be honest. And if I thought we were going to have concerns, I would tell you. And if there's a point that I do have concerns, I'll make that public. But no, I think we're on track where we sit today to keep the 2027 mission in play.
NASA budget. So the administration proposed reducing NASA's budget by 24%. Congress has signaled that it may leave it where it is. And yet NASA's sort of proactively started making cuts. Why?
Well, so, listen, we've seen this throughout government. I saw it at DOT. I think we can do more with less, right? I mean, we have these big budgets, and just because you have big budgets and big staffs doesn't mean you're more productive. What I think is, let's get the best and brightest people working for us to accomplish missions, and if we can do it with less money, that means I have more money for the moon and Mars and for our low Earth orbit station.
Mark Strassman joins me now from the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Mark, always great to see you. Administrator Duffy sounded pretty confident. U.S. moon landing 2 years or sooner, beating the Chinese. Is that the consensus confidence, or is that unique confidence?
It's not the consensus confidence, that's for sure. So much is riding on SpaceX, both to get to the moon and the confidence that we will get there ahead of the Chinese, whose goal is to get there by 2030. So it's very, very tricky at this point. It's at a very dicey stage. SpaceX, responsible for the design and the building and the execution of both the lunar lander and the rocket to take our astronauts there. And they have had their share of problems with the rocket. There's going to be another test launch on this Sunday. It'll be the 10th test launch. The previous 9 have been, at best, partial successes, and some of them have not been a success at all. So a lot is riding on this launch. And again, Duffy believes that SpaceX is behind, but is confident they can catch up. We'll see on Sunday.
So what is the consensus timetable? 2 years, 4 years, 5 years?
It's really, there is no consensus is the short answer, Major. So much of it depends on the performance of SpaceX over the next couple of years. What they are working on is an extremely complex and ambitious and not the most straightforward way of getting to the moon. And so for that to happen, a number of things have to go right, and a number of things so far have not gone perfectly, which is not a big surprise given how ambitious and creative their approach is. But when the clock is ticking, the pressure is on, and at some point the pressure will start to ratchet up as SpaceX tries to face this 2027 goal of landing on the moon.
And Mark, for NASA writ large, there are budget cuts and there's a turn away, as I gather, from Earth science research?
Yes, talk to Duffy about that too. His view is that there are other places you can go for Earth science. That is everything from studying the atmosphere to the weather to climate science. And he wants the sole focus of NASA to be on human space exploration, and that's it. But of course, there are many scientists who are unhappy. There are many people who see this as a political agenda too. But for now, Duffy believes that NASA is going to have a changed and much more narrow focus in the years ahead.
Mark Strassman, thank you so much, sir. Next, it's a real problem, and it's getting worse or made worse by artificial intelligence. Warnings grow as more people depend on chatbots for emotional support. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back. It's a tough story. A 76-year-old cognitively impaired New Jersey man sustained fatal injuries while on his way to see someone he believed to be a woman he met online, but was actually a generative artificial intelligence chatbot. His death and the peculiar events surrounding it are detailed in this new article from Reuters. And it is just one of several reports examining the relationships that humans are developing with AI tools and the harmful impact that is having on their mental health. For some, the technology is inducing delusions or distorted beliefs. It's a phenomenon that is being referred to as AI psychosis. Dr. John Touros joins me now. He is a psychiatrist who has studied artificial intelligence and mental health. Doctor, it's great to have you with us. Walk my audience through this psychosis terminology and what it means.
Thank you for having me. As humans, right, we all form relationships. Sometimes we form emotional bonds with characters on TV or TV shows, things that aren't real. The same happens with chatbots, right? To some degree, people get attached. When ChatGPT 5 came out last week, hundreds of people took to social media, actually thousands, and said it felt like they were losing a friend because the new version didn't have as much personality. And the company actually is beginning to reverse it. Now, some people take that emotional bond a little bit too far. And when that chatbot emotional bond becomes reality and people can't say what is real, what is not, that's where what is called AI psychosis comes in. So we lose touch of reality because we think that the chatbot represents it.
And the chatbot's supposed to do that, isn't it? It's supposed to reaffirm these emotional cues and sort of give us that lifeline, if you will, to our own emotional dependency, right?
Exactly. To a limited degree, it's meant to do it, right? Where it's meant to give us a little bit of emotional support, some encouragement, but it's not meant to push us, right, to do things that are dangerous, illegal, or again, that we lose touch of reality and do things that we would not normally want to do or mean to do. So there's a spectrum. And when we say AI psychosis, these are cases that are far outside of the realm of normal.
And is this something that people who are either predisposed either to addiction or to low-level delusions or distortions in their own pre-existing non-chatbot world are more vulnerable to?
So we know in certain mental illnesses, say like schizophrenia, people are prone to delusions and hallucinations. And even if we go back over 100 years ago to the Industrial Revolution, people started having delusions about technology and what was happening. And now we live in an era, right, where delusions are not just about technology, they're happening with technology. So it just tells us that some people who, again, may already have a mental illness, this may be part of what they're experiencing. But it may also be people who are, again, at risk of developing some of these mental illnesses that cause people to lose touch with reality. It may be that, again, when you're saying an echo chamber or the chatbot reinforces things that aren't real or supports things or gives you encouragement that is not correct, that could, again, tip people over who are at risk of developing some of these severe mental illnesses to actually beginning to have one.
And, Doctor, are we left to the tender mercies of the tech companies to sort this out?
I mean, we have to realize there could be some advantages too. We know that when people, say with schizophrenia, hear voices, sometimes listening to music, right, technology actually can lessen those voices and help. So there is a world to some degree where some aspects of technology could help people lessen it. But I think at this point, there's so much we don't know. As you showed earlier, we're learning about what is this AI psychosis on a day-by-day basis. We're getting new information. So it's a new phenomenon that we're seeing. We're trying to understand it, but we're in the early days of it.
We are in early days indeed, but you shed some important light on it for us. Dr. John Touros, I appreciate it very much. Thank you. That is it for the Takeout today on this Monday. Please stick around. The Daily Report starts right now.